Welcome to the EWTN Great Britain podcast with me, your host, Peter Jones. I'm here again with Sam Baker for the second episode in our Catholic Man UK series to talk about a monolith of a subject. Marriage has taken a right kicking.
Yes, I guess certainly after the advent of contraception and free sex, and it has certainly pulled down the structure of marriage as the real safety net for families and for couples.
In the beginning, I kind of mentioned the last podcast, Adam gets his wife handed to him, and from the beginning, before original sin or the fall, Adam is walking around with his short ears, a very attractive young lady, walking around naked. So we could say, whatever we think of God, he is not a prude. Modesty and restraint and all these things are a condition of our fall, handbrakes that we need to put on in order to stay within God's plan for family and marriage.
You're right in a way that, it was simple for Adam before the fall, and God made this extraordinary woman, as we read, out of his own flesh and bone, and Adam marvels at it, doesn't he? This indeed is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. An awesome moment.
He's very happy, isn't he?
And it makes him whole. That's the funny thing, isn't it? Something's been taken out of him, his rib, and yet he feels a certain completeness by seeing this other being in front of him. And this story follows us through our culture, doesn't it? Of boy meets girl, man meets woman. It follows us in our songs, in our films. It seems to be what everyone aspires to, that romantic story of finding the perfect partner.
And I kind of, in all of this, God is calling us. It seems plain enough to me. The Christian message finds its fulfillment and makes its strongest case, one of its most strong cases for how to live. And it's the world that's kind of deformed it, with divorce, and I don't know what the taglines are now. You meet a lady one night and maybe another one the next night, and people are just quite disposable. And while you're young, you've got to get it.
And I think that's because there's a whole shift in thinking about what being with another person should be, and that shift in thinking is to really appeal to one's own needs. What is it that I need to get to be happy? What is it that I want to satisfy myself? Rather than it being an act of service, it's not just an act of service to the other person who you're in that marriage with, but an act of service to the family that you bring into the world, an act of service to society, as we were talking about last time, an act of service to God. It's our way of bringing God's own family into being in a sacramental manner that God takes part in. That's the marriage element, isn't it? That any man can shack up with any woman, but it becomes marriage when it's made as a promise.
We take those natural feelings and we sanctify them, but the church is sanctified, raised it up to God. Yes,
and God then steps down and takes part in it. And we become his people.
And we need that help, Sam, as I'm sure if we get into this, by my own strengths, I'm just not up to this.
We do need God's help with it. It's his gift. There's very little that we can do of our own volition to make it work. And within it, we're called to be co-creators with God. That's a fantastic thing that he steps down and allows us to take part in creation by physically bringing forth new life and a family. And also he allows it to be for us a reflection of the union that God wants to have with us through the Eucharist. Marriage is incredible on many levels. And I think every Catholic man needs to have this in mind, from an early age, and this is perhaps something that we'll move on to. It's not easy to have this in mind. We're not being taught this anymore. We're not being made to realise that our vocation as men is one of marriage. Now, either marriage to the church in priesthood or marriage to a wife. And I think we'll talk about single men on another occasion in another podcast. But even there, one can say consecrate oneself to Our Lady. But it is something that's been very much missing from the education of young Catholic men, that our vocation is not a hard one to discern. It's either marriage to the church or marriage to a woman.
And it's not a stretch to make that claim that it seems like it's been systematically removed from any kind of formal education or distorted at the very least.
Yes.
That's been kind.
Yeah. And let's just repeat, why is that? Because with the advent of contraception, it's made sex freely available, free and easy, I think was where I was going to go, without the obligation to settle down with the results of that act, which are our children. Men then have no sense of the need to commit, no sense of responsibility.
Sure, yeah, responsibility for actions as well.
Yeah.
I would also like to say, because sometimes online debates I get into, what if teenagers get pregnant? This is some kind of nightmare scenario. But I would say, if a person is not living by the Christian standard, even if they do get pregnant, or a man gets a lady pregnant, God is kind of calling you back. The natural law, the natural way of things is calling you back to say, well, look, here's this child. Responsibility needs to be taken.
There's no way that we can sit here and be critical of things that happen like that. Everybody fails, but for the grace of God. And I look back at my own youth, and I thank God that some actions that I took didn't result in chaos for a woman and for a potential family. But it's almost like saying that there's no point in having any rules of the road. We can just drive as we like and, well, forget about the consequences. We do need to go back and draw a straight line and say, look, take any actions outside of the rules and there are going to be consequences. Fine, if you do have an accident, if we're taking the analogy further, let's hope that we can mop things up afterwards, and no one's going to hold it against you, but
sure,
we need to learn.
It's a great chance to, I think all those, I certainly think of my own sins. I'm sure many men do. It's a chance to redeem yourself,
yes.
to recommit. A man's life is often about his second chance.
And his third, and his fourth.
Yeah, his fourth, fifth, and second. But he kind of messes it up good style the first time round. And, when he kind of comes of age properly, right, okay, you're meeting a new guy, you're kind of reborn in a way.
But I think we are also suffering the consequences. As we spoke about in our last podcast, we spoke about rules in terms of rules of the game, rules of rugby, rules of football. And the game goes so much better if those rules are laid out to you first and foremost, and you can practice them before actually going into a real game. And a man's childhood should be learning those rules. And who should teach him but primarily his father and the other men, the other responsible men around them, through their actions, through their words, through their good example. And this is perhaps something that we do need to come to if we're going to be talking straight down the line, and particularly to younger men out there, but also us older men, is that those rules are important. And what are those rules? And you need to be planning and preparing for them at a young age, from the age of reason, really. Understand that first, your vocation is marriage in one way or another. Secondly, there are ways to prepare for it. I don't know about you, but I was so unprepared for marriage, so unprepared for it. And I've spent the time being married.
Playing catch up
And learning what it means to be married, learning what the rules are. And I wish I'd learnt more about them before.
Yeah, if I might say on that, you often hear this kind of, it's almost a throwaway line, and I must say my eyes sometimes roll when I hear it, but God can drag the good out of the bad.
Yes.
And when you talk about those kind of situations, a lot of guys, myself included, you kind of learned on the hoof of what you hadn't picked up beforehand. I remember just before I got married, and a few of my friends that got married before me would have said, marriage is healing. We should, as Catholics, trust in the institution of marriage to also a redeeming force for us, and an educating institution. I shouldn't say force, institution.
Yes, and within the safe boundaries of marriage, it does allow for one to perhaps explore those facets of oneself that do need some work. It's often very clear that my wife highlights to me where my faults and failings are. And yet there is someone who will work with me on that. And I think that's something important to consider. I think let's go back a bit, and let's go back to...
Yeah, we've jumped a bit. We've jumped ahead of ourselves there slightly.
We have.
Right.
I think what we were trying to establish was that we might come at marriage from a place of, or feeling like it's a place of failure. We've mucked up, we've slept around, we've
done whatever,
looked at porn, and exactly, and done whatever. And that's a good thing to establish, that marriage as an institution is good in itself, and we can learn a lot from being in marriage. But let's go back again to before being married. There's a lot of preparation that should take place by a young man before he gets married. And one of the things to prepare is making clear in one's own mind what one is entering into. And it's not It's not unmitigated sex the whole time. It's not lovey-dovey romance. It's not a surrogate mother who's going to cook for you and look after you. And, no, it's actually a task from God to bring his family into being, the man and the wife together, raising children to be godly young Catholics. And that's the task. And how do you prepare for that? Well, we talked a bit earlier about physical fitness, for example. Something seems very simple, but you were saying that a family needs energy, and so we need to be fit. We need to have taken up a sport, weightlifting, powerlifting.
As best we can, young children take it out of you.
Yeah.
They want you to be in a good mood, and they want you... As soon as I'm tired, I'm sure most people like this, get grumpy, sharp tongue, etc., etc. Another
rule I think we need to learn and play by is the rules of leadership, of leading this union. My youngest sister lamented so many times going on dates with young Catholic men that they seem to have no idea how to lead on those dates, how to book a restaurant, how to decide what to do with the time on the date. She wanted to turn up knowing that she was being taken out on a date and it had been organised, because for her, she was making a judgment of that young man as to how capable he was then going to be later on down the line about judging other things that were necessary to marriage, like how do we utilise our finances, how do we find a good place to live, how do we make our budget stretch out.
We're maybe jumping the gun again because I totally want to get into this. It's kind of a fruit of the age almost, that kind of an effeminacy in men to, or what would you like to do? To constantly put that question over is irritating. What's on the menu? What should we get? I said, before I got married, call it being a northerner or whatever, I don't know, I had to ask the girl, and that was part of my initiation and part of my gift, really, to marriage. What comes with that is the risk of rejection. And I think that all of this is priceless for the man. And to get a rejection, I think, is also a good thing. Kind of a bit like the boxing ring, it slaps you about a bit.
It does, and it makes you...
It resolves you.
Self-critical, doesn't it? In a positive way. What is it that I'm doing, and what is it that I'm doing wrong, more to the point.
And I think that's a kind of gift to the lady, if she does say yes. Fortunately, she did. That no matter what happens in the future or how hard things get, you can always say, if they start cranking on about something or other, I chose you, I came after you. And that's a huge thing to say. And almost a kind of a peace, a real foundation of peace for the marriage. Anyway, look, I'll come back to that, maybe.
Well, no, I think it's a good point to continue on, because...
We're putting what was that phrase? The child is the father of the man. And we've skipped past the child a bit. I know you want to get into that, Sam.
Well, we can always go back to it, but let's just continue on that point, because the vocabulary that we use around the man asking the woman to marry him is the word to propose. And in that context, it's kind of lost its meaning, which is to put forward a suggestion about something that should happen. We're proposing that you and I come together to form a union and to procreate, to bring God's family into the world. And that is a huge task. Now, the man proposing, he needs to know very clearly what it is that he is proposing. He needs to have it clearly laid out. We come under the criticism of, aren't we domineering? Isn't it just the patriarchy, the man telling the woman what to do? You never really hear in business that the CEO of a business rejects making decisions or stepping out with a vision because he's worried that other people in the business are going to get upset. No, he steps out and he says, or even she says, this is what needs to happen. I have the clarity of vision here based on a greater understanding and a greater sharing of what the needs are here. But someone's got to make the single decision and be responsible for it. You can't have two CEOs or else you'd be at loggerheads. So anyway, stepping back a bit to this word proposal, the young man needs to be absolutely clear what it is that he is proposing. And in all of that, catching all of that up together, in dating the woman, in his courtship, he also needs to be very clear, because it sends out a signal of, I know what I'm doing here. I have a clear path ahead, and I would love you to take part in that. Come along with me. And I think for many young women, perhaps that would be a relief to hear that. Certainly was for my sister.
It kind of seems to live almost in a Jane Eyre novel.
Yes, we do.
This vision of marriage need not only live there.
And there's a picture of manhood that is being formed there that is very attractive to women today. But look, let's go back to one of the other rules to play by as a young man in preparation. And that is just don't muck about with pornography. Don't even go there, despite its deep attraction.
Certainly with porn, you can almost... It's one of those temptations that's so attractive, your mind can play every kind of trick. I always think the hard and the fast rule is sometimes just your best bet. Then you've kind of ruled out that openness to temptation. You just got to say, right, this is the most serious sin. It offends God greatly. I jeopardize myself in all kinds of ways. And if you take nothing else on the subject, if you discuss it in no other way, then just stick to that hard and fast rule, like you say.
In this day and age where you have got to treat it really seriously, there's no use lamenting, in the past we didn't have so much access to it and it wasn't so prevalent and it wasn't so open.
The excuses are so long and so many.
We have got to cut out the excuses. We may even have mentioned this in the last podcast, but hard times make strong men. And these are hard times with regard to purity and chastity. And one way, I think, of looking at an approach to taking a stand against pornography is really understanding that we are called to marriage and we are called to one woman. We are moving away from our God-given divine task.
That's right, that vision
of marriage, of that vision. And I think it's you're right there, that lack of vision that we are called to marriage and we are called to that one woman. That lack of vision is what really allows us to go, oh, well, look at another woman, there's no harm there.
Sure, or I'm not married yet, so therefore the world's my oyster in terms of choice.
That's right.
Some porn will kind of aid me in this or something like that.
Now, look, we talked again about sort of failings. We're not sitting here in judgment, in fact. I'm not going to delve salaciously into my own use of pornography. I think it's very valid to say that no one is immune, no man is immune, and increasingly no woman these days. It was through marriage, though, and loving my wife, that bit by bit, eventually I got to a stage where pornography really didn't and doesn't feature in my life anymore, and I thank God for that, and I thank my wife for it.
I always think of that phrase, you cannot serve two masters. In the end, you'll either love one and hate the other.
I was exactly going to move on to that. Exactly going to move on to that. A slightly different take on it, though, insofar as when you see the beauty of marriage and the beauty of your wife and understand what it's all for, to then move into something it was such a bastardized form of it, that I remember points where I was sickened by it and by myself, thinking, what the hell am I doing, or what have I just done, in contrast to what I know marriage is.
Great point, Sam, because that is also that we are the temples of the Holy Spirit, and to feel that rejection, and it's like a nausea, is the supernatural crying out, or your soul, or I don't know all the language about that, and it's a good reaction to have.
Sin is always a turning away from God, and pornography is one of the most obvious turnings away from God and his plan. And of course it's going to make us feel twisted inside because we've removed ourselves from who we are meant to be. But we need to recognise the level of addiction that then also takes place. As men, we can get into a horrific cycle of addiction. It is a very isolating activity. It makes you sit there on your own, feeling bad about yourself. And one of the ways out is to buddy up with someone who will keep you accountable and who you can go to and go, look, I'm tempted. Or you can go to afterwards and go, look, I fell again. And someone who will just help pick you up.
To have a third eye on yourself and step back, because it is degrading, isn't it? It's shameful, it's coward. It has all those... You just know it's got all those kind of ingredients to it. I'm not totally sold. I've kind of heard accountability partners in the past for other things. I'm not totally sold on. Certainly the Brit will sit down and share all that kind of thing.
I think my accountability partner was my confessor.
Yeah, and I think, look, get to confession. I'll come back to that. Love, you cannot love two masters. So you stay in the ring with. But if you have to stay in the ring with both of those masters until the fight resolves itself, then that's what you do. You do not capitulate to porn. You keep going. You keep saying your prayers. You say more of them. Then you go to confession. You go more often. I always think for these kind of things, it requires. One talk I heard years ago is a priest from up north. I think his diocese's father, Ian Pettit. I think that was his name. These things require a violence of the mind. I think that is appropriate language. If you have to do something like that, something internal where you have to take some severe action.
I agree with you. One of the ways that I tackled it was becoming more aware of the occasions when it took place. So I could begin to track that, well, yes, I was in the house on my own. That would be one thing. I wasn't occupied with anything else, so the day stretched ahead of me. I hadn't said my morning prayer, potentially.
One talk I heard, it kind of made it out, porn and not women, I might add, as a kind of something that you just got to run. I think maybe it's Padre Pio made this likeness. You just got to run. This is not someone you can take on. You are not going to win. The imagery in Lord of the Rings is of huge value. I think this with the Nazgul, when they're on those winged beasts, you don't stick around. You don't pick a fight. You just start running.
That's right.
Quick.
You might be right with Padre Pio. There's some sins that you just turn around and run away from.
By your own strength, look, you don't stand a chance. And that's one of them. And that's kind of the level, the seriousness with which you have to treat it. This is one issue where men can really come. The fellowship of men is united.
The one thing that unites us all.
But look, to deal with it.
Yes, and to deal with it, absolutely.
Let's just assume everyone has it on their CV.
Yes.
And then we can just get on with the real business of tackling it.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll come back to this, if we don't say everything here and now.
So we've been talking, haven't we, about preparation that can be done by young men before marriage, the things that they need to think about, actions that they need to take almost before they even consider courtship and dating, and that's a whole other minefield.
Sure. A lot of the same rules apply, really. You have to avoid the occasion of sin, which is the same for porn. A modesty. What's it of the eyes? What's that phrase of
Custody
the eyes? Custody of the eyes. Yeah. Sounds like they're being arrested.
There was a fantastic video Vine, and I think it was posted on Catholic Man UK, and it looked like it was a video taken in Mexico because the guy was dressed up in his particular outfit with possibly even his guitar in hand, and he walks past an absolutely incredibly stunning Mexican lady, but my goodness, she was hanging out all over the place. And he catches a sort of one glance of it and turns away and crosses himself. You could just see the effort it took not to turn back and look at her again.
How heroic of him just in that one moment.
It was very heroic.
Yeah, we can tell a lot about that guy just in that split second.
The look on his face as he closed his eyes and clenched his teeth and then crossed himself.
Well-raised guy. Look, therein lies most of the rules we've been talking about. Custody, the calling to the supernatural, the running, the immediate action that is required.
And yet we see that as heroic. We look at that man and go, that was a heroic choice to
make.
Who
is this guy?
And so there is something elevating about being modest. It's not being prudish. It's not downtrodden or anything like that. It is heroic.
I do want to get into the prudish side of it, where EWT and policy and a modesty of language require a kind of careful language here, but all of those things are meant for your wife, the one, really, the one that you've chosen that's been sanctified. The union has been sanctified. And if you're not doing all those things and you are that kind of pure, chaste father, then all of that kind of, can you call it an energy, and it goes into the marriage. It's not lost. You get kind of phrasing
back.
them. Stumbling over my words here. I'll just say it again.
Again, you're setting the groundwork as a man through that courtship of a transparent. I'm just going to start that bit again.
Yeah. So, but all right. So let's try it again. So all of that custody of the eyes and that virtue, impurity, and chastity then goes into the marriage, and it's part of that gift that you give to your wife. I'm committing to you above all others, even looking at all others, or flirting, even in my imagination, with all others. Our Lord kind of reserves very serious language, isn't he? Even if you look at another, you committed. I mean, shucks.
Yeah.
That's serious stuff, isn't it?
It is serious stuff.
And to do those things, and then to give yourself to your wife, the fulfillment of all of that comes then, and the joy of the marriage, and all those fruits of the marriage, and to make it last, because it's a unifying, isn't it? It's unifying. Not just in the one moment, but as a foundation for you, your children. Part of the argument for purity for me is, I want to say to my kids, or not even have to say to them, they can just see it in me. All right, my dad actually did stand for something. He did choose the right way.
And that's, again, the heroic way, isn't it?
Yeah, the heroic, and it'd be a huge disappointment for me as a father not to be able to say that of myself, even if they never found out or whatever, they weren't to actually ask me, but just I can stand before them and say, look, I'm your father, here's the standard.
And there are many, many anecdotal stories of people who saw either their parents, mucking around with that level of chastity, playing the game, playing away, or who later on in life found out that their father perhaps had fathered other children, and the shock and the letdown, the disappointment, yes. It's just incredible, and so it is something very sacred that we need to be protecting. And just going back a little bit to the young man and his courtship, how does a young man these days go about courting a young lady, let's say in a Catholic context? It's not easy.
It immediately flies in the face of try before you buy.
Yeah.
Which I might say, in the culture, if somebody said, I'm going to try you before I buy you, highly inclined to raise a number of my fingers and keep other ones down, just as a kind of automatic response.
Yeah.
There's zero dignity in that. And there is an obvious dignity and raising up of the person to not try before you buy.
And that is part of the problem of modern culture. You listen into how everybody else seems to be going about their dating business, and there are no Catholic parameters. There are few Catholic families saying, look, hang on a minute, you're not going out alone there or there, you're not going to be spending time in the house together. All these rules that seem draconian, and yet again it's like the rules of the road.
Preserving
your
children.
It is.
I kind of see, even on a very small scale, large Catholic families, the children are quite proud of the parents and do take what they say seriously and look towards other large Catholic families. I think that's kind of come as part of where we're at in society now, with a polarising society, the left and the right and all that kind of stuff. When we were young, I kind of think parents were immediately seen as not that cool, and once you get to a certain age, you can reject the things they've taught you.
But I think there's going to come a point where young people, and hopefully young people brought up in the faith, are going to look around them and they're going to be sick of what they see and go, this
is rank.
Yeah, it's brought us nothing. This free love, this anything goes dating, this one night stand, it has brought us nothing. And one would hope that things begin to realign and people go, well, what would make me feel that love was something beautiful?
Sure.
What is it that, or what
calls
are the
me out
steps
of
that
myself.
I could do, to make this pure, to make this wonderful? But I think they also need a nudge from us adults, and that nudge is reinstating the rules. I've told the story before of my 15-year-old daughter, in fact when she was 13, so a couple of years ago, who was being pestered by a 16-year-old lad to go out on dates with her, and she stepped out of the front door to take a phone call, which was highly unusual, and I was highly suspicious. And I called her back in and said, who was that? And ended up speaking to the young man on the phone myself and saying to him, look, if you are thinking of going out with my daughter, it happens on my terms. She's 13. And you go where I say you go to meet up, and it's going to be, it could be going out for a walk, that's fine, but I'm going to drop my daughter off there at this time, I'm going to pick her up at this time. And I must admit, after I got a bit of a mouthful from him on the phone, but he went along with it for about 2 or 3 occasions until my daughter came back going, Dad, he's such a waste of time. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think she could see that protection that I was able to afford her allowed her to find and discover something in a safe environment. And she realised that she could step away from it. and say to this young man, "No, that's it, I'm sorry, I'm not going to come out again. Yeah, that's it, it's over," without heartache, without confusion.
I might add, Sam, kudos to you that a failure to act by you there could have easily resulted in, it's kind of almost those small stones in youth result in an avalanche of disaster later in life. And I think that is where the father steps in, and your daughter's chatting to you quite candidly after.
Yes. Oh, it opened up some great conversations.
The courage to act as a father, you know.
It does take a bit of courage because you are worried about how you'll be perceived.
It's very hard to find a hero in the modern culture. One good thing that's happened in the recent culture, when celebrities do a video, you know automatically to ignore it. I think that's no bad thing for the Christian message. But coming back to heroes, you'd be scratching your head to think of heroes for certainly young people. But just on Lord of the Rings, quickly again, Aragorn, who did have the benefit, I think, of being 82 at the time he got married or something like that, had a lot of life experience. But he didn't sleep with his bird. He courted it on the bridge with that lovely light. No heavy kissing, and
in fact, weren't they apart for many, many years?
Apart from many, and he kind of cherished her love and all of that. And I think the backstory is he had to really fight for it. The elves weren't too happy. But here, at least in Lord of the Rings, once again, it is a kind of supreme example. And he had all these trials to go through. You know, he's the Dunedain warrior, and went through these rites of initiation, Strider, and then Aragorn. And anyway, we all know the story.
Yeah, and I know we're wrapping up, but I think rites of initiation or rites of passage are hugely lacking in the lives of young men in this day and age. And those rites of initiation almost were the entry into marriage. Look, you've proved yourself as a man. You've shown that you can, I don't know, fight off the wolf with a stone and a flint knife or whatever, and now you're a man, and now you can step forward into the sort of community of the intergenerational community of us men in the tribe, the village, the clan, and now you're ready to marry. And I think that is missing to a great extent among our young men.
Sam, it's been great seeing you.
Likewise.
Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks, and you.